Alright, we're going to get started, and tonight we're going to be looking at Kathyrn Kuhlman. Now this is the last of the series on the Pioneers of Faith. I mean, there's a lot more that we could be looking at, but for now, this is going to conclude the series. And she's considered the woman of miracles. And as I said last week, all these people, I mean, they date clear back, some even to 1800s. But last week was A.A. Allen, and he was alive the same time I was alive. So when we hit him, this was the only guy so far that was alive when I was alive. But then when you get to Kathyrn Kuhlman, she dies in 1976. The difference between Allen and her was I was too young to know. At 1970, I'm like 7 years old, so you know, how much memory do you have? And then TV was really three to four channels. But when you get to 1976, we at least had 10 channels. And I remember her because cartoons played on Saturday morning. And, you know, every kid's glued to the TV on Saturday mornings. But on Sunday mornings, there's no cartoons. I could never figure that out. Now later they did, but in my day there was no cartoons, so all you had was a lot of religious broadcasting and news, things of that nature. And I remember flipping through there and seeing Pat Robertson on the 700 Club with Ben Kinchlow, and but I remember her because she was different. And I didn't know what I was watching. You know, this would probably have been 74, 75, but I'd watch a little bit of it and be bored and click it to the next thing or whatever. But I do remember watching her a little bit and on TV. So I have a little bit more of a remembrance, of course, of this one. I have none of A.A. Allen because I was 7 years old. So Kathyrn Kuhlman was born 1907 in Concordia, Missouri. Her dad was seemingly wealthy, a businessman, and also became mayor of that particular city. Her mother was the disciplinarian and very harsh with her, showed her no affection, and the father would be the one showing affection. If the father would intervene and say, hey, you're being a little too hard on her. She had a sister too, but if the mother was being too hard on Kathyrn, the father would say something and then he'd be in the doghouse for the next week or so. So he had to watch what he said. A lot of times they weren't even sleeping in the same room because they didn't get along a whole lot. So the mother showed no affection. She got all her affection from the father. And she would go through town as she got older, and she'd go with him as he collected money from the people in the towns because of his business. He'd sell his product to the people in the city, and they would go in there, and she would go with him as he collected his money from them. Now, that's her childhood. It's not a whole lot there. Her conversion was in 1921 at 14 years old, and nothing drastic. She did have the Holy Spirit come on her, and she was weeping, and she knew something was. She does not remember what the preacher said. She just knows she had an encounter. So that's at 14 years old. Now her sister, who's older than her during this time, marries a guy who's an evangelist. And so they travel, and her sister Myrtle leaves, and they travel for a few years or so, and it's not working real well because they need a babysitter. They've got kids of their own, and they've got the ministry. So they come back and talk her parents into Kathyrn being like an evangelistic maid. So in other words, while they're ministering, Kathyrn will be taking care and watching the kids and so forth and so on. So she leaves the home at 17 years old and goes on the road with her sister and brother-in-law and spends the next 5 years with them in the ministry, but she's not really in the ministry, she's supporting it, but did not know by being around that ministry that God was preparing her for her own ministry. She had no clue that that's what was happening. So in 1929, in her early 20s, she launches out on her own. And so places like, that's where she grew up at. That's a pretty nice home for that time of the year, you know, in the United States. You had a house like that. So she'd go off preaching, and the only places that would accept her would be small venues, little tiny churches, and even like this is a schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse. And then she wouldn't have a place to stay, so she'd have to clean out somebody's turkey house and clean it out and sleep in there. I mean, this is really pioneer days, you know. And so, like I said, in the early 20s, mid to late 20s. And so she did have a partner with her, another lady, that stayed with her for a long time. She played the piano while she preached. And all she knew was the salvation message. So she said that she would preach it, and the next day she'd preach it again, and the same people that got saved would get saved again. And the next night she'd preach salvation, and the same people would get saved again. But she said, I didn't know anything else but a salvation message. So she did that, and like I said, this woman Helen was along with her, played the piano, and they just traveled places like that. They would just go to one place to the next place, and just, you know, building to where she was going to end up in Denver. Now in Denver, and that's her there, but in Denver, she starts this, and how this starts off is really interesting. So she ends up in Denver, and she gets a nice little crowd, and it just begins to grow. And again, just a salvation message, and it begins to grow. And she's there for, I don't know, several weeks, and finally she decides, okay, it's time to move, because that's what she does. She comes to a place, preaches for a little while, then goes somewhere else. Well, when she got up on her last service and said, I'm leaving, people were like, no, no, and they were like really upset. And one guy who was wealthy said, I'll tell you what, if you stay, I'll find a building and we'll buy it. And that's the building they bought. And I think it's seated around 2,000 people. But they bought this building for her, and they gave her some other perks, promised her some other perks. And she said, oh, well, okay, you know, if you want me that bad, I'll hang in there. And Denver was very successful for her. As you see, she got her own place. And during this time, this is around 1933, the Depression was in full swing. Many people were poverty-stricken. And so she preaches the salvation message, and the churches continue to grow. Now, it was known, it became so popular that if you were a traveling evangelist or minister or whatever, and you were coming through, they always would say, stop and preach here. This is a great church, it's a strong church, a healthy church, stop and preach here. And that's what many did. She had some popular men, and names I don't know, but popular names would come through there and preach. And then this guy shows up. His name is Burroughs Waltrip, and there's a picture of him there. I'll keep that up there because this is where it gets interesting. Now she is, this is around 1938. So she's been in Denver, I don't know, maybe 6 years or whatever. Things are going great. And this guy shows up and starts preaching. And she said he was very handsome. I'm not going to say he's very handsome. I'm a guy. You know, I guess he's okay. He's not ugly, but she claims he's very handsome and very attractive. But he's married, so you know can't do nothing with that. He's married, and so he comes through there. Then he goes up to Iowa and starts a ministry. And I think he's from Texas, so he goes and gets his wife. They come back through, and this is where it gets a little shaky, where facts are a little different depending upon what book you read or who you listen to. But the wife was seemingly jealous of the relationship because he would always come through Denver and preach for her, for Kathyrn. And so the wife came one time, and while they were preaching there, she just ups and leaves, claims she needs to get back to Texas to get the kids in school. But everybody felt like something was wrong, like maybe they got into a fight or whatever, and no one will know. But something was off, and the wife just leaves. And so he goes on to Iowa, leaves Denver, goes up to Iowa, and starts a ministry up there, Radio Chapel, I think it's called, in Iowa. And so she goes up with her piano player to help him raise money. So she's going to go up there and preach for him and help him raise money. And so as they're doing that, he begins to tell her that his wife deserted him and that he's filing for divorce. And so she's like, oh, okay. And so he gets his divorce, and he comes back down to Denver, and he preaches for her, and they start falling in love with each other. And she had never been married. He, like I said, claims his wife deserted him. And so they come back. So she goes back up to Iowa, preaches for him, and he proposes to her up there. So she accepts, comes back, tells the people in Denver that she's going to be married. Go to the next one. That she's going to be marrying him. And so everybody was against it. Everybody was against it. Helen, her right-hand person, was against it. People that she got really close to in Denver, the most people she got close to, nobody seemed to be for it. And she had this thing in her like, I don't know, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. But she went ahead and did it anyway. And they said at the wedding she passed out. And she doesn't remember anything. She was so much under conviction, obviously, that she shouldn't be doing this, and that she passed out. She did it anyway, and just said, trusted God. And for the next 6 years, she never preaches again. Of course, she's not at Denver anymore. That kind of folded, and or barely hung on there, but she couldn't go back there, and so she traveled with him for 6 years, and he did all the preaching. And eyewitnesses said that they would see her on the platform while he's preaching, and tears would be coming down her eyes, and many said that it wasn't from the message, it was from the fact that she knew she was out of place. She wasn't where she was supposed to be, and that she was fighting against what God had called her to. But she didn't know what to do, so she just hung in there for, like I said, about 6 years. So they're in Los Angeles, and she said this is the day she died. She said, it's over. I can't keep doing this. She didn't divorce him. She just says, I just don't want to live with you anymore. I'm going to go on and pick up where I left off in the ministry. And he tried to keep, begged her to stay around. But what had happened was she went walking, and she goes to this street, and she started walking down the street, and she's saying, God, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. And then she comes to this, and this sign says dead end. And the Holy Spirit says, you are on a dead-end street, literally, spiritually, and literally. And so she took that, because of the way the Spirit came on her when she saw that sign, dead end, she knew she had to end the path that she was on, because it wasn't going to go anywhere. She knew she shouldn't have done it in the first place. And so rather than divorcing him, she just decided to just move on. And so he'll later in life call that desertion and divorce her. But nevertheless, this is where she goes. But what happened was, in starting over, it wasn't easy to start over. When I'm reading her stuff, I don't find anybody coming against her because she's a woman preacher. As they did with Maria Woodworth Etter and Amy Semple McPherson, they struggled a lot because they were women. But I haven't read anything, not that it didn't happen, but her battle was the past following her. They would say she's divorced. She's divorced because she left her husband. They didn't know whether they assumed she was divorced. But anyway, she had marital problems, and so that followed her everywhere she went. I'll tell you, for instance, one place she showed up, the services were going great. And so she'd been there like 2 weeks or whatever, and so she shows up to preach. And while she goes to take the microphone, the guy who is heading up the services comes up and takes the microphone away, has his ushers escort her out of the building, and then apologizes to the people that he didn't know that she was a sinner and that she was divorced and blah blah blah. And so they go to her hotel, get her stuff, and escort to her, buy her a ticket, and they actually exited her out of the city. So she's in that bus crying. She feels like everywhere I go, people find out my past, and then I get judged and I have to leave the city. This happened a lot. And so she really fought against that because her past kept following up. People couldn't keep their mouths shut. However, people wanted to judge, condemn, shame, guilt, that whole thing. That was huge back in that day, as it is even today. But she ends up, and here's where the story starts getting interesting. So I'm trying to set this up for you. So as a divorcee minister, and she ends up in Franklin, Pennsylvania. And why there is because it was a small coal mining town founded by German immigrants, and nobody knew her there, and it was so small they were like isolated from the rest of the world, and she just needed a place to land, a place that was safe, that would accept her, and then she could just minister to the people, her calling, just to do what God called her to do. So while she's in Franklin, it starts going well. She says, I want to go. She's never been on the East Coast, so she wants to go south. So she leaves Franklin. She says, I'll be back, but I'm just going to go on down south. She goes through West Virginia. She goes through Virginia. She spends some time in the Carolinas. But as she goes down south, it doesn't go well with her, and I don't know why, I haven't read why, it just says it was unsuccessful. So she ends up coming back to Franklin and saying, well, this is where I have the most success, this is where I'm most accepted. And so she ends up staying there in Franklin and works with a local pastor or somebody like that who has a building called Gospel Tabernacle. And so she ends up renting that from her. It seats about 1,500, and she starts growing the ministry. Again, she's only preaching salvation. So it grows and gets to capacity. And then it was that time someone said, well, you need to go to Pittsburgh. And so she goes to Pittsburgh and has humongous success. So much success in Pittsburgh, preaching at Carnegie Hall, I think it was. But she has so much success, she moves her headquarters, her office, to Pittsburgh, where she will stay and live the rest of her life until the day she dies. But she doesn't die in Pittsburgh. She dies in California, but she's still living in Pittsburgh. That's where her residence was when she dies. So that's pretty close to home here. And the fact she comes through West Virginia, too. So all that's taking place. And so she's in Franklin, where she feels like she's supposed to be, preaching salvation messages. And guess what happens? Some veteran, World War I guy, had something happen to him from war. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, he comes, and while she's preaching salvation, she's not even preaching divine healing. She's not asking if anybody wants to get healed. Remember, this is the one I told you, somewhere when we were doing these, that healing was taking place in Kathyrn Kuhlman's sermon services, and she wasn't even preaching on to praying for him. So while she's preaching a salvation message, someone gets healed and comes up front, and somebody else gets healed, and man, it just takes off. That's why she goes to Pittsburgh, because she was on the radio, and when people in Pittsburgh started hearing about it through the radio, her service, her healings and stuff. So by the time she gets to Pittsburgh, she's already got a lot of people wanting to see her, because healings are starting to take place, and she's not even a healing evangelist. She doesn't even see herself as a healing evangelist. And so she's just, like, okay. But healing and miracles start taking place in her life. Around this time, too, she hooks up with Rex Humbard, if you remember him, and Amy, his wife, who has a gigantic tent around Ohio. I don't know exactly where in Ohio, but somewhere in Ohio she hooks up with them, and he's on TV. And so what's happening here? What you're going to see is she starts connecting with people because it's in our time frame, and so that starts happening. So her ministry's starting to really take off, and she gets a knock at the door. It's the sheriff, and guess what he has? Divorce papers. Where Burrow Waltrip filed for divorce finally, and when she saw those papers, she says, well, I'm done. To herself, she says, I'm done now. And she started teary-eyed, and he goes, wait a minute. He didn't even come in his clothes. He walks into her office. He doesn't come in his uniform. He comes in street clothes, which was why she was caught off guard. And so she goes to take him. He goes like this. He said, hold on. He said, I know who you are. He said, normally this will already have been in the papers, because we give names of divorces in the newspaper, and if they're really popular, they go to the front page if they're really like a celebrity type. And he said, that's just been the custom. He said, however, I never submitted this to the newspaper. And she goes to take it, and he goes, also, this will only be between me and you. No one else will know this. He said, I have been coming to your services. I've been touched by God. I've had my own encounter. And I know you're supposed to be here, and I know you're the real deal. And there ain't a thing I'm going to do to hurt that. And so this saved her 7 years before the East Coast, that area, finds out about her divorce. But when they do, her ministry has launched so big, it never affects, because the signs and wonders talk for themselves. And no one cares about the divorce, because too many people are getting healed and miracles are taking place, so forth and so on. But anyway, that's the and that happened. The divorce with the sheriff happened around 1948, And so she moves her headquarters to Pittsburgh. She's at Carnegie Hall. At the first service there, the janitor says, "You've got too many chairs." She says, "What do you mean?" He goes, "No, take all these chairs down. All you need's this, that." He goes, "Celebrities from Hollywood can't fill this place." And she says, "Oh, you're just trying to watch out for me." She said, "However, you go ahead and put the chairs, the metal folding chairs. We'll just trust God." And she filled it up the first night completely, so full, it was completely full that that afternoon she had to do a second service. So that just shows you the signs, the wonders, the healings, the miracles were taking place, and people were hungry for it, and they were all packing the place out so that they could also receive as well. Now, at this time, which I'm only saying this because I'm trying to thread all this together. Now, during this time, if you remember a guy named Gordon Lindsay, who was born in Chicago, around Chicago, Zion, the city that Dowie built. He was born there. He gets saved, Gordon Lindsay, under John G. Lake, and starts a Voice of Healing magazine, I think it is. And he starts putting in his magazine all these people that we've talked about. And he knows them personally from Dowie on. Now, I don't know about Smith, though. I'm not sure about Smith. Maybe not Smith, but the rest of them. So anyway, she has an opportunity. Remember, Gordon Lindsay was the one that was working with Branham. Remember, he just up and left him? And they had all those hotels they needed to fill with the speaker. And so he got A.A. Allen, he got W.B. Grant, he got Oral Roberts, a lot of the guys that were alive during that time to fill in for Branham because he collapsed and had a breakdown and had to leave, so I'm out of here. Remember that? Okay, so Gordon Lindsay was heavily involved in these healing evangelists. She, however, would not associate with that ministry because though there were honest men in it, there were also dishonest men in it that were more into sensationalism, and she didn't want to be a part of that. And she also said, "I'm not a faith healer." She would be before the crowd and says, "I am not the one healing you." So when someone says, "Thank you," she says, "Don't thank me. Thank him. I'm not the healer." She was big on not putting that attention on her, and that it was God who was the ultimate healer. God, she was just used by God, but it was God. And so that was another thing that was interesting. She didn't claim to be a faith healer. So now comes the time in her life. Everything's going great. She's staying in Pittsburgh. That's her place. That's where she's prospering, and the ministry's growing. It's healthy. And then David Wilkerson was friends with her, and this was about the time that the movie The Cross and the Switchblade came out with Nicky Cruz. And she was really good friends with David Wilkerson. She was friends with Nicky Cruz, and they both promoted each other's ministry. And David Wilkerson said, "There's a guy in California I want you to meet. His name's Ralph Wilkerson." Now, they're not related, they just happen to have the same last name. He says, "I think you need to go to California." And she told David Wilkerson, I love it here. There's no need to leave Pittsburgh. Everything's going great. I don't need to go outside. I don't need to go to California." He goes, "Nah, it's okay. I don't want to." Well, they keep talking. He keeps talking to her over time. And finally she says, "Okay, I'll go." So David Wilkerson hooked her up with Ralph Wilkerson, who was big out in California, I think Melodyland. He had a big ministry out there, church and stuff. So anyway, they hooked them up, and they really like each other. So she launches a ministry and starts teaching and preaching in California. Now here's where it becomes really interesting. She has huge success in California. And she will, at this point on, she will hold her last 10 years. She'd go out there a couple times a year and hold meetings in the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. She also got to speak at Amy Semple McPherson's church, I can't think of the name, Temple, Los Angeles Temple or something like that. But anyway, so she was her hero, but she never met Amy Semple McPherson. And so she got to go out there and preach in her church and that she had built. And she also got to interview Amy Semple McPherson's son and daughter when she ended up getting a TV show that I ended up watching around late 60s up to 76. She had a television show. which we'll get here in a minute. But anyway, she got to interview Amy Semple McPherson's son and daughter. Now, also, and I'm just trying to show you this, she launches her TV and media ministry, TV and radio, and they, prior to this, what made her do this was they said, you need to put your services on tape. And she says, I don't want to do that. And they just kept, you need to do it. People need to see what's going on. They need to see people coming out of wheelchairs, so forth and so on. And so she finally said, okay, let's just do a couple. So they filmed a couple. And wherever they showed those videos, now, you know, you're watching a video, right? People would get healed watching the video. Huh? You want to share your thing?
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead.
Last week, whenever we was watching that video, of course, my back, I had it happen before in between my shoulder blades, where I got tensed up and couldn't even turn my neck, and it was going to that. And watching that video last week, I didn't even realize it, but I got healed. It healed in between. Pain was going, everything was going.
And that was a video of R.W. Shambach talking about the greatest miracle he saw by A.A. Allen that he witnessed himself. Now, if you were here and you watched that, you knew it was powerful. And so while he's watching that, he doesn't even know it. He gets healed. So when I was doing my work on this week, I'm like, oh my God, same thing was happening when they showed her videos. People were getting healed watching the video.
That's cool.
I mean, this is the power of God. That if life's on something, hey, look, they threw a man who had died on the dry bones of Elisha in a pit where Elisha's bones had been. You know, no meat, no flesh. He'd been dead for years or whatever. And when that dead man hit those bones, he came back to life. So you just never know when and what you're watching or where you're at, that the power of God doesn't come through something that's genuine, authentic, that you don't get the ministry of it as well. And so I thought that was really good. So she launched, she goes, okay, we got to do TV then. We got to do TV. She'd already been on radio. And so that she went and had to do it right. So she went to CBS in Hollywood and started filming in California her show. She was very supportive of the Jesus movement. How many saw Jesus Revolution, the movie, last year? Lonnie Frisbee. You type it on Google or YouTube and you'll watch her interview Lonnie Frisbee, and which is interesting. So she was very supportive of the Jesus movement at that time, which is the late 60s and early 70s, and went on to 80 even. But of course she passes away in 96 or 76. So she was very much involved, even to the degree that she was on the Johnny Carson show. Did you know that? And Johnny Carson was not very polite to her. He had her on. He said, you know, we hear from these doctors that a lot of this stuff is psychosomatic. So basically, it's all in their head. You didn't heal them, but you know, it was in their mind, and their mind healed them. She says, okay, well, let's just say that that's true. This is her response. And she says, well, if that's true, and I don't think that it is, but if what you're saying is true, she says, why can't the doctors heal them that way? Why are you saying that I'm healing them, which I'm not, it's God, but if the doctors can't heal them of it being psychosomatic, and God can, what makes the difference? They're walking out of the auditorium, out of their stretchers and out of their wheelchairs, healed. And he stammered and went to a, I tried to look for it, I can't find it, but he stammered and went to a commercial. But nevertheless, you know, that's just an interesting story. Also, she was not for the shepherding movement that was going on in Fort Lauderdale, California, or Florida, which involved Derek Prince. I know these names might not mean it to you, but Derek Prince and Bob Mumford and another guy. I can't think of his name right now. And she was against that. The shepherding movement was that the pastor told you when to get a job, how to get a job, what job to get, who to marry, what to buy, what not to buy, how to spend your money, how to raise your kids. At that time, it was a shepherding movement that the pastor controlled your life. At least he wanted to. And he basically called the shots in your life. And she was not, as a lot of the church wasn't, but she wasn't. And she was supposed to share the pulpit or the stage with Bob Mumford. And she says, I will not get on that stage with that man. They teach a false doctrine, and they're controlling people, they're manipulating people, and so forth. Now, these guys, Derek Prince and Bob Mumford, went on and repented of that teaching. And they said it definitely was extreme. They came back into balance. But at that time, they were young too, and they thought that was the way to go. But so she was on the right on that one. She also was friends with Pat Robertson. And this is back in the late 60s where Jim Baker, you know Jim Baker, the PTL, well, Jim Baker was an assistant to Pat Robertson back then. And so she shows up. Pat Robertson wanted her to preach for him, an auditorium and Cummins' chair. And so he wasn't there, but Jim Baker was. And Jim Baker said, "We can't start till Pat gets here." She looks at her watch and says, "He's already late." He goes, "I know, but we need to wait." She looks out and she sees all those people have been sitting there. And she looked at Jim Baker and said, "The Holy Spirit is not on your time schedule. I'm on this time schedule of the Holy Spirit." And she went out. And Jim Baker tried to hold her back, and she says, "I'm not waiting for him. I'm not on his timeline. I'm on the time of the Holy Spirit." She marched right out there and preached to those people. So those are just some interesting things. She also got to interview Corrie ten Boom, which you know she's hit all those Jews over there during the Holocaust. And but there was an estimation of at least by records, 2 million people that were healed through her ministry. 2 million people. And she probably has more videos than them all on you. Of course, not very many have. I mean, you can get on there and hear Dowie, an audio of Dowie clear back in the early 1900s preaching. So if you look up some of these, you might find audio. But it's not till TV comes into play that you find A. Allen, Jack Coe, William Branham, and of course Kathyrn. But there's a lot because she had a weekly television show every Sunday. That's the one I watch it periodically, not knowing what I was watching. I'm not saying I was watching that like I should be. It was no cartoons. You had nothing else on. I was bored. And so anyway, there's a lot of videos up there by her. And but an estimation of 2 million people were healed through her ministry. And one was, I kind of remember, I don't have it on my notes, but one was, I don't know how many, there were lots that were documented by doctors. And so a doctor wanted to do something with some documentation or whatever, and he came up on the platform with whatever he had to share with the people of what he had saw himself. So all I'm saying is there was documentation. Now you can do a study and you're going to see a lot of people lied. They do that today. They lied just to get on the stage. And then when you go find them, they still have their ailment. They just lied. "Oh, it doesn't hurt." And they're just probably dying in pain. "It doesn't hurt. Yeah, I'm healed." You know, you have that. So that doesn't reflect on her or God. It's just people want to be on stage and meet her, and they'll lie. Or for whatever reason, maybe they got sick again. I don't know. I mean, Jesus told that one guy, "Hey, you're healed, but don't sin unless something worse comes on you." So it's not like, "Hey, you're never going to get sick again." I don't know. Okay, you're just going to hear a lot of stuff from a lot of people. When you look up these things on video and stuff, there's a lot of people that are against this movement, this healing movement that was taking place, especially during the Depression and stuff. But you're just going to see a lot of people that just don't believe in that, and so forth and so on. So anyway, so in 1955, and I want to bring this to a conclusion. I got 5 minutes because there's a 20-minute video I want you to watch by Sid Roth. And Sid Roth is also, if you type his name in with her, when he's really young, she interviews him as a Messianic Jew getting saved. But he interviews, we're going to look at, and of course you're going to have to figure it out if you're watching by video or YouTube or Facebook. You type in Sid Roth and the greatest miracle Kathyrn Kuhlman ever did. That's how we found it. But anyway, so in about 5 minutes we're going to look at that video. That's why I'm trying to hurry up to get done here so we can have that time to watch it. It's about 20 minutes. So in 1955, she has a heart condition that the doctors find. She's around her late 40s, but in spite of the doctor, she keeps a busy schedule, 4 to 6 hour long meetings, nightly, so forth and so on. So she really does not listen to the doctor, and she goes full blast, and that was 1955, and she goes full blast for 20 years. So in 1975, a doctor diagnosed her with a minor heart flare-up. She had something happen, so that's what they said it was in November of 1975. She has a relapse, and as a result, she goes into open heart surgery. Now, the night that she goes into the hospital so she goes in the hospital, but prior to that evening, she does a service. And from what I understand, Carlton Pearson was there, and I guess maybe he was singing or something, and he was in the backstage watching her, and they said if she's ever doing something weird, don't touch her, don't talk to her, because she's in the spirit, man. Just leave her alone. But he said this time, he felt that something was wrong, because she was grabbing the curtain, she was grabbing the wall, making her way to the platform. But he said, I can't go up there. Maybe she's just in the spirit or something. So he closed his eyes and says, God, am I supposed to help her? She doesn't look like she's doing very well. So he opens her eyes to look, and she's gone. She darted out on the stage, and for the next 4 to 6 hours, she operates miracles, signs, wonders, does as if nothing's wrong. He said she gets done, comes back, and collapses. And then they take her to the hospital. And so she ends up going to Oklahoma. They take her to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and do open heart surgery there, because they said they had better heart surgeons in Tulsa than where she was at. And but so she basically doesn't do well at all in that open heart surgery. So here's where the story, there's a couple of different stories, but I'm going to give you the better one. So she comes out of heart surgery, not good at all. It didn't go well, and they don't expect her to live. So Earl Roberts and his wife Evelyn come there to pray for her. And when Earl said he walked into the room, this is his testimony, and his wife's, they walked in, and the power of God was in that room. And so Earl says, oh my God, she's going to get healed. So he goes, we're going to pray for healing, and we're going to, he's talking to her, and she's awake, and she goes like this. And his wife, Evelyn, says, I don't think she wants to be healed. And Earl says, Kathyrn, do you not want to be healed? And she can't not talk. She goes like, no. He goes, you want to go home? And she goes like this. And he went, okay. So they just prayed over her and thanked the Lord for her and her ministry. And she died there in February of 1976. Buried in Glendale, California. And if you really want to know the best, now this is an authorized biography, meaning that she sits down with Jamie Buckingham and tells everything. Everything else is somebody else is looking at facts and trying to put things, but this is an authorized biography by Jamie Buckingham, and it's called Daughter of Destiny, if you want to, read up on her. Now, what are some of the takeaways real quick? And there's really one, is that God does not hold back His gifts and calling because we don't sin or do sin. You don't earn that by your morality. You earn that by grace. It's just as simple as that. The problem is, can you get up after you fall? The other problem is, will they let you get up after you fall? And so she had the courage to get up, but had to fight those who wanted to keep her down. And that's going to be probably with all of us in any way, shape, or form, wherever circles you're at. Sooner or later, you're going to do something that's going to, I thought you was a Christian, man. Or, you're a minister, you should know better. And you're going to get that. But the funny thing is, and the one they can't stand to do anything with is King David. He not only was an adulterer, but he murdered the guy that was the woman's husband. And so, God kept him as king, said, this is a man after my own heart. And there was forgiveness for him. And David received that forgiveness. And in Psalms 103 said, bless the Lord, O my soul, who forgives all our transgressions and heals us of all diseases. So you're the one. You're going to get people to push you back down, but it's going to be on you. It says the Bible says the righteous falls 7 times, but they get up again, something like that, Scripture, something like that. But when the righteous fall, they get back up. The problem is, many people don't get back up because either they condemn themselves under too much shame, or they let other people keep them down. Like the crabs in the bucket, keep pulling people down, you know, because they don't want anybody to rise up to do anything. And once they see something you're doing wrong, oh, they write you off. And but the thing was, you can't write her off because the miracles and the signs and wonders promoted her. That last time that, because I think a Presbyterian minister over on after, like I said, 7 years after that sheriff served her the papers, divorce papers, she had 7 years more without people finding out. And then when they did find out, this Presbyterian minister or a Catholic minister, one of them, put it in the paper, but it didn't matter. She'd gotten too big. So just know that God is not judging you. He's trying to get you to get back up and trust Him and His grace and operate in what He's called you to do. And so that's the big takeaway for me. And I don't know about you, but hope you got something out of it. We're going to go ahead and stop the video right now, the video feed and the camera.